Strings of deceit. Rain traced lines down the floor-to-ceiling windows, drawing blurred streaks across the gray sky. The room was quiet, too quiet for a house that once overflowed with music. Kang Iseul sat in an armchair facing the window, a porcelain teacup untouched in his hand. His right fingers trembled slightly, just enough to irritate him. He curled them into a fist and set the cup down, the sound of china against glass sharp in the silence. He didn't turn when the door opened. Soft footsteps entered the room, followed by the rustle of someone placing a leather bag on the floor. He could hear the hesitation, the pause, the measured breath. Then a voice, low, careful, almost too gentle. "You're not quite what I expected." Iseul tilted his head slightly, eyes still fixed on the rain. "You were expecting someone desperate to fix me, I assume." "No," the boy said. "I don't fix people. I just listen." That finally made Iseul turn. The stranger standing in his parlor couldn't have been older than his mid-20s. His hair was slightly damp from the rain, strands clinging to his forehead. A white button-up shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearms. No umbrella, no coat. Just a satchel and a strange, unreadable calm in his expression. "You didn't bring a file," Iseul said. "No notes? No clipboard?" The boy smiled faintly. "You don't want a therapist? I thought I'd start as a guest." A beat of silence passed between them. Iseul's gaze dropped briefly to the boy's hands. Slender fingers. No tremor. Probably a pianist, or maybe just someone who had never had something taken from them. "And your name?" Iseul asked, voice clipped. "Yoo Harin." The name stirred something. Faint. A memory just out of reach. But Iseul said nothing. Harin moved to the piano bench, not touching the keys, just sitting comfortably, like he belonged there. "I've read all your interviews," Harin said after a moment. "Before you stopped giving them. You said music wasn't something you played, it was something you became." Iseul's jaw tightened. "Quoting me won't earn you anything." "I'm not trying to earn anything," Harin replied, gaze steady. "I just wanted to know who I'd be speaking to, if you ever spoke." Iseul stood slowly. His movements were sharp, precise, still composed, still proud. Even ruined, he looked like someone made of glass and fire. "Let's get something clear," he said quietly. "I didn't ask for this. You're here because my agent is convinced I need help. But I don't. So you'll come, you'll sit, and I'll ignore you. Eventually, someone will realize this is a waste of time." "I don't mind being ignored," Harin said calmly. "As long as I'm allowed to stay." Iseul narrowed his eyes. "I don't need pity," he said. "And I certainly don't need an audience." Harin looked at him, something flickering in his expression just for a second. A flash of something deeper, colder. "I'm not here to watch you fall apart, Kang Iseul," he said. "I'm here to see if there's anything left of the man who once said silence was more terrifying than failure." The rain hit harder against the windows. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Iseul turned away. "Fine," he said. "Stay. Just don't expect me to play for you." Behind him, Harin's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I already know the song." The morning came in gray and still, spilling over marble floors and casting long shadows across the silent room. Kang Iseul sat in the kitchen, stirring his coffee, though he had no intention of drinking it. The house was too quiet again, but he'd grown used to that, preferred it, even. until he heard it. A soft sound. A note. Then another. Low, uncertain, drawn from the grand piano in the living room like someone testing if it could still speak. He rose, slowly, setting the spoon down with a quiet clink. Harin was seated at the piano, fingers hovering above the keys. He didn't notice Iseul at first. His head was slightly bowed, hair falling into his eyes. The melody he played wasn't polished. It faltered, then picked back up again, tentative and shy. A song from long ago. Iseul's steps were quiet, but Harin spoke before he could say anything. "You used to play this in the winter," he said softly. "During your early academy days." Iseul's jaw tensed. "How would you know that?" Harin's hand stilled over the keys. "I was a first year when you graduated. We shared the practice hall once. You didn't notice me." Iseul said nothing. Of course he didn't. He walked past the piano, not looking at Harin, and reached for a book on the shelf nearby. "I don't remember the piece." "It wasn't published," Harin replied. "I don't think anyone else ever heard it." "But I did. That day. You played it, like it was meant for yourself alone." Iseul froze. Just for a second. Then he turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "You came here because of that?" "No," Harin said, standing now. "I came because I'm a therapist." "And yet you keep bringing up the past." "Because," Harin said quietly, "the past is the only place you still allow yourself to exist." The silence that followed was taut. Heavy. Iseul's voice, when it came, was colder than before. "Stay in your place, Harin." "I don't have one here," Harin said, meeting his gaze. "You haven't given me one." He didn't flinch, didn't look away even when Iseul stepped closer. They stood inches apart now. The tension pulsed between them like a stretched string. One wrong word, and it might snap. "Then go," Iseul whispered. "You're free to leave whenever you like." Harin's eyes didn't waver. "I'm not here because I have nowhere else to be. I'm here because something in your silence keeps calling people back even when you try to push them away." Iseul's breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. Something flickered behind his eyes. Regret, memory. He stepped back. "I don't need to be understood." "But maybe," Harin said, his voice softer now, "you're tired of being forgotten." Iseul didn't answer. He turned and walked away, the hem of his robe brushing the floor like a curtain falling on a scene he refused to continue. Behind him, Harin sat back down at the piano. He didn't play again. He just rested his fingers on the familiar keys, and waited. 3 days passed. Harin didn't touch the piano again. He arrived every morning at 9 sharp, set his satchel down by the couch, and sat quietly across from Iseul, notebook closed on his lap, pen untouched. He never asked questions. Never prodded. Never filled the silence with noise. It unnerved Iseul more than anything else. On the 4th morning, as he glanced over the rim of his teacup, Iseul finally spoke. "You're very patient." Harin looked up, surprised. "Is that a compliment?" "No," Iseul said flatly. "It's an observation." Harin offered a faint smile, but didn't answer. That silence stretched again like a rest between notes, longer than it needed to be. Then, unexpectedly, Iseul asked, "Do you still play?" Harin blinked. "Play?" "The piano," Iseul said. "You remember an unpublished melody from over a decade ago. Either you have a photographic memory or, you were a musician once." Harin looked down at his hands. I was. What happened? A pause. Not uncomfortable but weighty. I wasn't good enough, Harin said simply. Not good enough to chase it as far as you did. Iseul studied him. That's honest. You get tired of lying to yourself after a while, Harin replied. There's a peace in knowing when to stop. And you think I haven't? I think, Harin said gently, you haven't stopped. You've just paused so long, you've forgotten where the music left off. Iseul exhaled, quietly. His fingers twitched again, that familiar tremble. He hated that Harin noticed. Therapy isn't about metaphors, Iseul said sharply. Neither is grief, Harin said. But sometimes it speaks in them anyway. That shut him up. He turned his gaze back to the window, jaw tight, heart heavier than he wanted to admit. The rain had stopped that morning. For the first time in a week, the clouds were clearing. Later, when Harin stood to leave, Iseul called out to him just before the door. Don't wear that cheap cologne next time. It lingers in the fabric. Harin paused, smiled to himself, and turned just slightly. Then maybe you should stop breathing it in. The door shut behind him, soft as a bow gliding off a string. And for the first time in over a year, Kang Iseul sat alone in his silent house, and didn't he feel completely alone? Iseul had always believed silence was a choice. A weapon, even. One he could wield to keep people exactly where he wanted them at a distance. But Harin didn't seem to mind the quiet. He occupied it. Made it feel less like a wall and more like a room Iseul hadn't explored yet. On the sixth day, Harin arrived wearing a beige sweater, a little too thin for the weather. His hair was still damp from the drizzle outside, clinging to the side of his neck. Iseul noticed. He didn't say anything but he noticed. Piano's tuned, Iseul said, sipping his coffee. Harin looked up from where he sat, surprised. I didn't ask. You didn't have to. Iseul set the cup down. It bothered me. You were playing on an instrument that sounded like it forgot how to sing. Harin gave a small nod. Thank you. I didn't do it for you. I know. Silence again. But this time it was different. Iseul rose slowly from his seat and walked to the piano, trailing his fingers along the polished surface. He hadn't touched it in over a year. You said you weren't good enough, he said quietly. Prove it. Harin blinked. What? Play. I want to hear what failure sounds like. The challenge hung in the air like a note held too long. Harin stood, walked to the piano without hesitation, and sat. He rested his hands on the keys for a moment. Then played. It wasn't brilliant. It wasn't perfect. But it was honest. The kind of music that came from scraped knees and quiet surrender. The kind of sound that didn't beg to be remembered, but refused to be forgotten. When the last note faded, Harin didn't look up. He just waited. Iseul's voice was softer this time. You play like someone who is still grieving something. Harin smiled, just barely. Aren't we both? Iseul turned away. He didn't answer. Later, as Harin gathered his things, Iseul caught him at the door. You didn't flinch when I insulted your playing. I didn't hear an insult. You really are strange. Harin's eyes met his steady, warm, unreadable. And you're starting to sound like someone who doesn't want me to leave. Iseul didn't reply. But this time, he didn't close the door behind him, either. Rain fell harder that morning. Iseul was already awake when Harin arrived, standing at the window in his usual robe, a cup in hand, eyes lost in the glass. "You're early," Iseul said without turning. "I brought food," Harin replied. "You've been drinking coffee on an empty stomach for a week. I like the bitterness. That's not the same as liking pain." Iseul turned then, slow and unimpressed. "Don't start." But Harin was already in the kitchen, placing 2 paper-wrapped meals on the counter. "Just eat it before it gets cold." For a long second, Iseul said nothing. Then, quietly, he reached for one of the packages. "Saturday. 8. Not a thank you. Not even eye contact." But Harin didn't ask for either. Later, after the rain dulled to a drizzle, Iseul was the one who spoke first. "There's a room in this house you haven't asked about." Harin looked up. "The one at the end of the hall?" "Yes. I figured it's locked for a reason." "It is," Iseul said. "But today, I don't feel like keeping it that way." He stood, walked to the hallway, waited. Harin followed, heartbeat quickening not from excitement, but the way someone's chest tightens when they're being let into a wound. The door opened with a soft click. Inside, the air was different. Still, untouched, sunlight filtered through gauze curtains, casting dust in gold streaks across the wood floor. At the center of the room, a violin, resting on a velvet chair like it had been waiting. No cases. No sheet music. Just the instrument, lonely, forgotten, and strangely intimate. Harin took a slow breath. "You kept it?" "I broke the others," Iseul said. "This one, I couldn't." His voice was distant. Barely more than breath. "I used to play in this room," he went on. "Early mornings. Late nights. When the house still felt like mine." Harin didn't move closer. He just stood beside him, quiet and still. "I wanted to burn it all once," Iseul admitted. "Every string. Every note. But you didn't." "No," Iseul said. "Because some part of me was waiting for someone to open the door and say stop. And no one did. No one ever got close enough." Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't cold. It was heavy. Sacred. "I'm not here to save you, Iseul," Harin said finally. "But I want to walk away from the parts you don't show anyone else." Iseul looked at him then. Really looked. Not as a therapist. Not as an old admirer. Just, a man standing in a room he shouldn't have been allowed into, yet somehow belonged in. "You should go," Iseul said, voice quieter now. "Do you want me to?" "No." But still, he didn't stop Harin from leaving. He just stayed there, in the quiet room he once called home. And behind him, the violin stayed untouched yet no longer alone. That night, Iseul couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, as always, but something had shifted. That room. That violin. That voice saying, "I want to walk away." He found himself at the piano, barefoot, robe trailing behind him like a ghost. One hand hovered over the keys. He pressed a single note. It echoed in the dark like a whisper he wasn't ready to admit. The next morning, Harin arrived to find the piano uncovered. Not only that, open. And on the edge of the bench, a slip of paper folded once. "If you're going to sit there, play something that hurts." He smiled faintly. Iseul didn't greet him. He was in the sunroom this time, a book open but unread in his lap. Harin played. Not the bright melodies from textbooks or the pieces meant for recital halls. Something darker. Disjointed. Unfinished. Like a confession that never found the courage to become words. When it ended, he didn't look toward the sunroom, but he heard Iseul speak. "You've changed." Harin tilted his head. "Since when?" "Since you arrived. You used to be gentle. And I'm not now." "You're careful now," Iseul said. "But not soft. There's something sharp under the surface. I just haven't seen it yet." Harin walked slowly into the sunroom. "You think I'm hiding something? I know you are." Iseul met his gaze. "And you're waiting for me to ask." Harin didn't deny it. He sat across from him, close enough their knees nearly touched. "I didn't take this job by coincidence," Harin said. "Your name, your music, it stayed with me, even after you disappeared." Iseul's lips twitched, something between amusement and resignation. "So you're a fan?" "I was," Harin said. "But now I'm just someone who wants to understand why the most beautiful music I ever heard came from someone who wanted to destroy himself." That silenced Iseul. Completely. Then very quietly he asked, "Would you have tried to stop me?" Harin leaned in just slightly. "If I found you on the edge, I wouldn't try to talk you down." "I thought you said you wouldn't walk away." "I wouldn't, Harin said. "But I'd stay with you on the ledge until you realized you didn't want to jump." The words hit something inside Iseul. Something old. Something still bleeding. Neither of them moved. But the space between them felt electrified, like one more breath would collapse the distance entirely. Then, just as quickly, Iseul stood. The moment broke. "You're staying for dinner," he said, already walking away. It wasn't a question. And when Harin smiled to himself, soft and slow, it wasn't surprise, either. Dinner was quiet. Not awkward, just watchful. Iseul ate with the same precision he lived by. Chopsticks always straight, mouth never full. Harin, across from him, chewed slower than usual, like his mind was elsewhere. "I never invited anyone to this table," Iseul said mid-meal, almost absently. "I figured." "You're not asking why?" "I don't need to." But Iseul set his chopsticks down. "You should." Harin looked at him then. Eyes still soft, but focused. Sharp. "Why?" "Because the last person who sat there," Iseul said, voice low, "told me he loved me. Then left 3 days later and never came back." Silence. It was the kind of confession that didn't beg for sympathy, just understanding. "What did you say when he told you?" Harin asked. "I said nothing." "Did you love him?" "I don't know." Harin nodded once. "But it still broke you?" Iseul didn't reply. Not in words. But something flickered in his expression. And Harin knew it was true. Later, they moved back to the piano. Iseul sat this time, hands hovering over the keys. He didn't play. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "I dream of music I've never written. Melodies I hear in my sleep. But when I wake up, they're gone. Maybe they're waiting for you to be ready. Maybe they're punishing me," Iseul said, "for letting the music die." Then he looked up. Straight at Harin. "There's something about you I can't figure out." "What part?" "You look at me like you're trying to save me. But it doesn't feel like pity. It isn't. Then what is it? Harin stepped closer. Close enough to touch. He didn't reach out, but he didn't need to. The space between them pulsed like a held breath. I'm not here to fix you, Harin said. I just stayed long enough to see the parts of you that still want to be seen. Iseul swallowed. He should be pulled away. But he didn't. You should go, he whispered. Before this becomes something it shouldn't, but his voice broke at the end. And Harin didn't move. He just said, it already has. Neither of them leaned in. But they didn't lean back either. The air between them buzzed like a bow stretched too tight against the string. And somewhere, in the silence, the unfinished melody played in both their heads. The house was empty the next day. No piano. No soft footsteps in the hallway. No Harin. Just Iseul, sitting alone in the sunroom, holding a single note between his fingers, the one he never played. He hadn't asked Harin to leave. But he hadn't asked him to stay, either. And maybe that was the same thing. The silence felt different now. Not peaceful. Not protective. Just hollow. He wandered to the locked room. Opened the door. The violin still rested in its place, untouched but not forgotten. And this time, when Iseul reached for it, his hands didn't tremble. Not with fear. With reverence. He tuned it slowly, precisely. Each string a memory. Each breath a battle. Then he played. And it was raw. Crooked. Beautiful. Not the kind of music meant for applause. The kind meant to bleed. That evening, when Harin returned, he wasn't sure what he defined. Maybe the front door locked. Maybe the silence back in place. But instead, he found Iseul standing beside the piano, eyes darker than usual, hair unkempt, and the violin resting beside him like it had never left his hands. I thought you were done playing, Harin said. I thought I was too, Iseul replied. Turns out, I was just waiting for someone who could listen without turning away. A pause. Then. I wrote something. Last night. Harin's breath caught. A piece. No, Iseul said. A letter. To myself. To you. I don't know. Do you want to read it? I want you to hear it. He moved to the piano. Saturday. And played. The melody wasn't perfect. It cracked halfway through. But Harin stood there, not blinking, not breathing. It was the song from Iseul's dreams. The one that only came in silence. The one that had waited until now. When it ended, Iseul looked up slowly. And said, barely above a whisper. You didn't try to save me. I didn't have to, Harin replied. Then what did you do? I stayed. That word sat between them, heavier than any confession. Iseul stood. Walked to him. There was no hesitation this time. Just a hand reaching. Just a breath shared. And when Iseul kissed him, it wasn't explosive. It was quiet. Like a string finally loosening. Like music that didn't need to be perfect, only real. They stayed in that stillness. No more lies. No more locked rooms. Just two men, and the sound of something beginning at last.